Thank you, and I want to say welcome to University Research Council. We're the home of Reading and Reach and the Global Reading Network, and my name is Jean-Marc Bernard. I joined in March as the project director for Reading and Reach, and I wanted to welcome you today. I wanted to talk a little bit, just to provide this welcome, and then I'll pass it over to our panel to get started. I just wanted to let you know a little bit about the history of this event and how it came together. I looked back at, last night I looked back at a 2010 event that happened at Brookings, where we began to talk about the importance of reading. Everybody named the call event. We talked about the need to assess student performance. We talked about the lack of focus by teachers on reading, and just to reflect back on just the enormous amount of work that has been done to date with UC investing in 88 reading programs up to now in 41 countries, and just in 1 year, 25.7 million children have been reached. And there's a lot of evidence to support the importance of this investment. In terms of the UK interventions, I was looking at the cost. Reading interventions in Malawi at $2 per student. Countries at this point are scaling up, including Cambodia, Indonesia, Jordan, Kenya, Liberia, and many countries are showing improvement. But as you will see a couple weeks ago with the release of the Global Development Report, there's still a lot of work to be done. With the tremendous amount of increase in access, we still have a lot of issues with quality. And one of the things they noted is that the shortfalls in learning start very early. And management capacity within education systems is a major hurdle. And there's a lot of technical and political factors that are dividing schools, teachers, and families to focus on learning. I think everybody in our audience here knows the extent of this challenge in terms of working the system. So not only working with innovations at the classroom level, but being able to scale them up and trying to find a way to do it cost effectively. But there's a big challenge now because of the number of youth that we know at this point, even as they emerge from school, that are illiterate, so the number of students that are out of school. There's an enormous amount of challenge, and there's still a lot of work that we need to do just in terms of being able to effectively relay to any partners that we approach in our work the cost effectiveness of our intervention, building a case for investing in reading. Of course, with the focus on youth unemployment, there's a lot of focus on a certain age demographic, and we know that the work needs to be done early on. So with that, having seen this release of this report earlier this year by the World Bank, a report procured from Georgetown University, I thought it might be a good time for us to sit together again and hear from our colleagues that are looking at these issues in the field and getting more evidence on cost effectiveness of our programming, to just hear a little bit more about the research they've done and to help us as a community in terms of making sure the focus remains very strongly on this particular level. Kids early in schooling, including preschool, which of course is a new teacher process. Here to speak with us today, to share with us new evidence on the importance of investing in early reading is Patrinos. We know Harry well. He's the practice manager for the East Asia and the Pacific region of the World Bank's Education Global Practice. He specializes in all areas of education, especially school-based management, demand-side financing, and public-private partnerships. And he's one of the key authors of Lifelong Learning in the Global Knowledge Economy, as well as many other publications. Joining him is Liz Crouch to share early findings of RTI's yet-to-be-published policy paper, Why Should Asians Invest in Early Grade Reading? The report examines the importance of literacy to Asians' economic potential as a leading U.S. trade partner, and asks whether children and youth in the region have been requisite literacy skills to further education whether they're education and to further themselves in the workforce. Dr. Crouch is the Chief Technical Officer at RTI, and he has worked with many different organizations, including the GPE and World Bank. And Jean-Marc Bernard has kindly joined us to facilitate the conversation with them on recent research that they've done. He's the Deputy Chief Technical Officer in the GPE Secretariat in the Strategy, Policy, and Performance team. He works in more than 24 countries. He is a specialist in funding, monitoring, and evaluation. He was the lead advisor of the Program for Analysis of Education Systems. And he's also served he's worked with various multilateral agencies, UNESCO, UNICEF, World Bank, and he's going to help facilitate this conversation. I'm hoping after this session we can ask a lot of questions as a community to help us strengthen our ability to pursue new partnerships to support our work. And I hope you'll come out with a lot of good talking points to share with others. And we are going to share the PowerPoints online and the reporting online with you afterwards. I'm going to turn it over to Jean-Marc.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I would like to start by thanking the organizers to bring us together here. It's very exciting. We share new evidence on hopefully to have a good discussion around this evidence. But let me step back a little bit to put all this in perspective. 2 weeks ago, UIS released big data on learning, and showing how big data on learning things look even worse than they were before. So for those of you who didn't see the numbers, according to UIS, we are around 620 million children and youth not learning the basics in school, primary or secondary school. If we look at primary, we're close to 400 million children not learning the minimum, which means that most of them are not able to read. And each time we have better data, or more data, better quality data, we see a picture that is getting darker and darker. So I think that's really important for us to have this learning crisis in mind. I think that's not a new story, but with more data, we're able to tell the story a little bit better and be aware that there's a lot of focus to be put on learning. So of course we are in an environment with the SDG that is now putting emphasis on learning. Which is good. And in GP, we are well placed to see how things are evolving. GP is financing at country level grants, but the grants are designed and decided at country level. So we see how things are evolving. On the shift we saw in the last 2 or 3 years, the shift was more learning focused in the grants we finance, and also more focused on early grade learning and reading in particular. So we've been working to work on QSL and others around this issue in Gambia, Cambodia, Kenya. But as I'm also in charge of quality assurance in GP, I see the pipeline, what is under development right now, and I cannot disclose, but I see this trend going stronger and stronger and faster on early grade reading in particular. It's becoming kind of mainstream in a lot of grants we support at country level. I think it shows that we are really starting focusing on this issue of early grade learning in general and reading in particular. So I think it's really interesting to be here today with Harry and Luis to discuss a set of evidence, new set of evidence on early grade reading. That's interesting because both economists, so it's always interesting to see economists and well-known economists in the education sector both almost at the same time looking at this question of early grade reading and saying that there's something quite important here to consider. I should disclose that I'm also an economist. Maybe because with two economists is better than moderator of economists, I won't have that one to see what that's getting for later. I think that's really important to look at this evidence that economists are bringing on an issue that I think is not new at all for educationalists, but they bring additional elements to consider in a broader way around trade, economic growth, stability. This kind of element, I think that's really interesting. So I will start with this presentation, and there's two parts in this presentation that are well connected. The one is, of course, you hopefully all know that the World Bank just released the World Development Report that for the first time in history is fully dedicated to education. Previously, some of the reports, of course, address education as part of the report, but this report is already about education. So we're happy to have Ali providing us some of the insight from the report that are directly related to our discussion today. And then he will present a specific study done with Georgetown University on early grade reading. That's really the two elements of this presentation that is quite interesting. And then so you have to hold on with us to the presentation of Harry, and then we move to Luis, who is going to present a paper that is under development, some specifically focusing on early grade reading in Asia. So these two presentations are kind of talking to each other with a lot of elements that are reinforcing each other, but we would like to have the two presentations one after the other, and then we'll have the discussion. So if you agree with that approach, we'll ask Harry to start with this presentation.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Harry Patrinos with the World Bank, and great to see that there is a global reading network, and the devotion you have to early reading is commendable. And I'd like to start by showing a few pictures. And perhaps some of you drove in today and looked at a sign like this that told you where to go, that makes it pretty clear. But what if you couldn't read the language? It might as well look like this to you, right? And if you can't read at all, we might as well give room to read for this excellent graphic that they put together. But this issue is very serious, and the numbers that Jean-Marc just announced on the numbers of people who can't read, who are not at a sufficient literacy level to enjoy the benefits of education, and very importantly to enjoy the economic benefits of learning. So we're really focused on these now 400 million children. We talked about 250 million. The number unfortunately goes up. The World Development Report, thank you, Jean-Marc, for mentioning this, was just released a couple of weeks ago. And this week is the World Bank IMF annual meetings, and we are disseminating the report widely. The report draws attention to what all of you have been focused on, clearly the lack of learning that takes place in many of the countries that we're interested in, and what they call the learning crisis. The good news is that we know a lot about what we need to do, we know what the benefits are, we know what seems to work, and the report tries to put together an argument for action on learning, with the focus on getting children to learn, and to learn early. The report puts significant emphasis on the early gaps, the early reading gaps. And in the report, you can see clear evidence from the literature that many of you contributed to and know very well, that children who don't learn to read by grade 2 are severely disadvantaged, and if no reading fluency is acquired by grade 3, they will not learn at all. So we have many children who are going through the primary school system without any ability to read, and therefore no learning at all takes place. So a real crisis. The learning outcomes are low, not just in low-income countries. It seems to be severe disadvantage even in middle-income countries. So even people with basic minimum reading skills are still unable to function adequately at the higher levels. These results from assessments like TIMSS and PISA show that maybe 50–60% of enrolled students who have 8 or 9 years of schooling are at a level of fluency that's below what's required in the labor market. So severe disadvantages even for those who manage to get through the primary school system. We're also not doing a very good job at measuring learning outcomes. Much of the evidence on the lack of reading comes from a minority of countries in some regions. There's been tremendous increase in the numbers of learning assessments, thanks to efforts like early grade reading assessments and national assessments and PISA and TIMSS and the regional assessments, but many countries, we don't have any information on learning outcomes, which makes it very difficult to do any of the targeting or even to monitor the program. I want to come back to the question of measurement at the end. We're all very much pleased with the progress on schooling access. These data from famous data from Barrow Lee show that in 1950, less than 3 years of schooling on average worldwide. That increased rapidly over the next 50 years, and we've made significant push since 1990, Education for All. And in many parts of the world, the primary school enrollment rates are 100% or close to 100%. And it's estimated, projected that by 2050, average years of schooling in the world will be 10 years. So good news in that regard, but a year of schooling in one country is not worth a year of schooling in another. This is a box from the World Development Report that used the latest TIMSS data, took the highest performing country in TIMSS, which was Singapore. Singapore is also the top performing country in all the PISA subjects. But here in TIMSS, if we consider Singapore the highest level you can achieve in terms of learning outcomes, and that a year of schooling in Singapore is worth a year of actual learning, then we can compare other countries. So the 10 years or 12 years in Singapore in another country would be worth less than 10 years, or whatever the average is in Singapore. So we're looking at the Barrow Lee data on years of schooling and adjusting it for the quality of learning. It's a linear exercise with lots of caveats, but it's the best we have with the data that we have right now. I think later today in Washington, the World Bank will announce the Human Capital Project, where as a small contribution, we will extend this exercise to look at other international assessments and to adjust years of schooling for as many countries as we can. With all the caveats and the shortcomings, but at least it makes the signal that in education we do have a challenge of getting children into school, but we have an even more important challenge of making sure that learning takes place. And this might be one way to draw attention to the global learning crisis. But does all this matter if people are in school, if they're not learning? And it turns out it matters a lot. And one indicator that we use, Jean-Marc already said, we're economists, so let's just stick to one of the benefits of education, which is the ability to earn a living. Every year of schooling increases earnings on average by about 10%. It's higher in lower income countries. And part of the reason why we get this is because people do value the quality of education, learning that takes place, and we reward people in the workplace. And we get the high premiums to a year of schooling in lower-income countries because of the scarcity of education, just not enough people at higher levels, but also because the lack of quality puts a premium on those who do have those skills. So we still see a huge incentive for education. The problem in education is that you need more and more years of schooling. It's not enough to tell somebody that returns to secondary or 20% or returns to higher education might even be higher than that. You have to go through all the levels of schooling and successfully complete them. And all this starts very early. If you don't acquire reading by grade 2 or grade 3, you will not realize these returns. You won't realize, more importantly, the benefit of education and this basic human service. More schooling equals higher wages. More quality education equals higher wages. And more good news or incentive, the returns to education higher for women everywhere in the world, even in regions where the returns on average are relatively low, like in the Middle East. But for women, the returns to schooling are consistently higher than the returns to schooling for men. So let me talk about the work that we commissioned earlier this year, or last year, and two researchers that graduated from Georgetown, but at the time they were at Georgetown, and they're here, Jimmy and Sean, so they can field questions later if I'm able to. But the basic question was, what are we doing on early grade reading at the World Bank, and what more should we do, and what's the evidence base really? And I think the contributions of this report were to summarize the evidence base and to make a case for early reading. What I found particularly useful, and of course you know all of these things, is that successful reading programs have these characteristics. They have some combination of these characteristics. And they all call them different things, they have different ways of packaging them. They all provide basic teaching guidelines to teachers in order to teach early reading. That one is common in all the successful programs. And they all have one or other of these different elements. But the basic one is providing teachers with the knowledge to teach early reading. My interpretation as a layman or economist on this is that we prepare teachers through the teachers' colleges to teach to the average student, the mean student, the expectation being they're at grade level. But the students aren't at grade level, so we are preparing teachers for these early reading programs to be able to teach basic literacy. And when we do that, the programs are successful. Here's a compilation of the different programs. The greenish blocks are where the program takes place, the pinkish one where they jump. And in this selection of early reading programs from Africa, Middle East, and Pacific, the teaching, preparing the teachers is a common element in all of them. And then the other programs have different elements of those different characteristics. They all need something else besides the training of teachers, but they do it in different ways. This is just one element of the research they did. The other one, very importantly, to summarize the evidence base. So they carefully selected those studies that had a rigorous evaluation component where we could actually attribute the reading program to the results that we see. So all the programs, the other common element I forgot to mention is the actual measurement of reading to begin with. We have to know where people are before the intervention takes place, and that is something I want to come back to again at the end. But here are the effect sizes. And they nicely even explain how to interpret these effect sizes. So we're getting huge effects in some countries of over 0.8 standard deviations, which is unheard of in education research, and these are programs that are doing it at the most important level of education. 0.4 of a standard deviation is more or less a year's worth of learning, which is huge. There's a huge benefit that we're getting from these programs. Just to put it into context, many of the programs that get a lot of attention in the research maybe get 0.2, 0.3 standard deviations. 0.4 and above are huge effects. Some might say, well, if you're going from zero literacy to some literacy, isn't that easy? Yes, but why aren't we doing more of these would be my response. And even in these programs where the effect sizes are huge, they're still significant and still say they are worth it, and most of these programs are single-year evaluations. This is what we can do in 1 year with a population of students who can't read. Even in these programs, we see other benefits. They might not give full reading fluency, but they do pick up the elements that contribute to eventual fluency in reading. So we're seeing benefits in all the programs, even the ones that seem to have lower effect size on oral reading fluency. This is one of my favorite charts in the report on the case of Malawi. Here's an evaluation of an early reading program where at the baseline there's almost no reading at all, almost 100% zero reading. In 2 years, the intervention reduced the rate of illiteracy by a huge number, and those without a program, unfortunately, no reading progress at all. So we're talking about education systems that aren't providing any value added, and a simple early reading program in Malawi produces these great results. 44 percentage points, huge benefit. What does all this cost? We have a selection of studies with their unit cost levels, the cost per student in US dollars. They range quite a bit. Those programs that are small pilots have obviously high unit costs. The programs that are scaled have much lower unit costs. In Malawi, it's $2 a student. This is a huge benefit that we're getting for really an insignificant amount of spending. And given the level of spending on education, some countries spending 20% of their budgets, 3 to 5% of their GDP goes to education. For $2, we can ensure at least basic literacy by grade 3 or 4. Another important element I wanted to relate to is the coming technological revolution, the coming automation. And one of the early findings in the research on this is that there will be a lot of displacement of workers. In the U.S., it's estimated that 47% of jobs are subject to automation. So potentially those jobs may disappear, those workers may lose their jobs. We replicated that analysis to Vietnam, and what we found is that a higher number in middle-income countries that we studied will have the same level of automation. So the East Asia growth miracle, which prepares people for industrialization, are precisely those jobs that are more prone to automation. But who loses out the most are those with the lowest levels of learning levels. We use the STEP survey the World Bank does in Vietnam and the PX survey for other countries to look at these benefits. These are quite linear for high-income countries and for low-middle-income countries like Vietnam. Those with much higher scores are less prone to losing their jobs in the coming automation. So the benefits of early reading and the quality of education, which is its logical outcome, will not only give higher earnings to people, but will protect them in the coming automation that is a coming reality for many. So learning benefits are going to extend not only to the working life, but in the technological revolution as well. The other point I wanted to leave you with, which is I think also one of the underlying messages of the WDR, is that none of this is fate. We can change education outcomes. It all depends on good education policy. And I think Vietnam is a good example of how policy can help propel education outcomes. Nothing in Vietnam's characteristics would predict the scores they get on PISA. They are one of the poorest countries that participates in PISA, and they perform at levels above many OECD countries. And they've maintained this over the last 2 rounds of PISA. What is it about the Vietnam education system that produces these results? Causal longitudinal studies have shown that every year of schooling in Vietnam produces about 0.8 standard deviations in learning. All you need to know about that is it's twice what we see in other comparable. So learning starts early, and getting these results isn't something that is limited to a few countries. Vietnam can do it at its level of economic development. Other countries can do it. We know what the elements are. You know what the elements are. I wanted to close with this graphic from Cambodia, a country that doesn't get a lot of attention in education, but from very disadvantaged origins, they have used the early reading assessments, which were pilots. They extended these with their own resources. They now built a national assessment system, and they're seeing results that are going beyond the pilot area. So we're seeing the country's levels of literacy increase significantly, and they are going to be the next entrance into the PISA. They're going to do PISA for development in the next round. So tremendous progress in Vietnam, which is already considered an education superpower, but also in low-income countries like Cambodia. With these early reading measurements and interventions can make a difference. messages I want to leave you with, which were actually the messages that Sean and Jimmy gave us, were to focus on early detection of the reading gaps. So for the countries where we have this information, we can design programs, we can target. For many countries, we don't have the assessments. We don't have assessments, we don't have standardized assessments. And that, as Jean-Marc says, we're already into the SDGs, and one of the SDGs is to measure learning outcomes. We need an early reading measurement that would allow us to both monitor progress on the SDGs, but also give the policymakers and the teachers the information they need to attack the problem of low reading fluency and to design interventions that will work in their countries. And secondly, we need to focus our investments on basic education and especially early reading outcomes. All of the other things that we want to see in education, completion of primary, secondary, university, depend on people getting through primary schooling and coming out of the primary school with the ability to read at least by grade 3. If we don't do that, we will not reach the other benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Thank you for the perfectly on time presentation. I will let the floor to as good as
a good challenge. I'll try to do it in 5 minutes.
Some challenge here.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for having me here, and I hope this will be an interesting complement to what Harry has talked about. I think it's a little bit ironic that even though I got into this early grade reading thing earlier than Harry, he's presenting more of the micro data. I'm going to be presenting more of the macro data, but that's fine, I suppose. We need complementary kinds of evidence. So the only thing I would add to Jean-Marc's introduction is that of those hundreds of millions of kids that are not learning much, a very important point that I think the U.S. report made is that most of those kids are in school. Most of those kids have been in school a long time. So it's not like the old argument that says there are lots of kids out of school, and of course they're not learning if they're out of school. These hundreds of millions of kids that are not learning enough are in school already. So that's an important consideration. So I'm going to be summarizing a bit a report recently prepared by RTI on the issue of reading in Asia and what it can contribute to economic progress. But with the permission of the coordinators, I broadened the analysis a little bit, made it a bit more multi-country, just because I thought the audience might be interested in a multi-country perspective as well. And it's basically to explain in slightly more macro terms the evidence, the same kinds of evidence that Harry has brought up. And also tie it a little bit to the U.S. national interest from a foreign aid perspective. So 4 points that I'll want to make. The first one is basically around the issue of how education in partner countries pertains to not only a humanitarian interest on the part of the United States, but also a trade and political stability interest on the part of the United States. Talk a little bit about the channels whereby all this works, because it might seem kind of magical. Talk a little bit about whether it's causal or not, and emphasize the point that Harry already made very well, using slightly different and kind of a little bit more macro evidence, why we want to do it early, why it's not just about education as a whole, but the importance of early. Then make the empirical point saying, given that education is so important and given that it's important to do it early, how are countries doing? In particular, countries that are potential trade and investment partners of the U.S. So I want to talk a little bit about the interconnections between education or human capital and things like trade and political stability, and just emphasizing three relationships that I thought would be interesting from a foreign policy perspective: trade, migration, and political stability. And what I've done here, my methodological approach here, was simply to take all the countries in the world, sort them by years of education, what is the average years of education of the population, the Barrow-Lee data that Harry already referred to, and then group them into the sort of countries, the 5 to 10 countries with the lowest levels of education, the 5 to 10 countries that are right around the median level, and the 5 to 10 countries that are at the highest levels of education, and then try to see the relationship between those levels of education and some factors such as trade and migration. And there are three graphs that they all look the same, so I'm only going to stop on one of them, and the others I'll just flash them by to produce a kind of gestalt of the fact that the evidence is quite strong. And so what we have here is on one axis, let's see, it doesn't help if I point at it myself. well, okay. So it's not working. But you'll see on the left-hand side the average years of education of the population, and that's always showing up in blue bars. And on the right-hand side is the variable that's related to that, in this case, how much those countries import from the U.S. in per-person terms. And what you can see is that in the thank you, Jean-Marc. So you can see that in the sort of least educated countries, like, and those are exemplified by Niger, Mozambique, Mali, Senegal, very low levels of education. Level of imports from the U.S. is $7 per person per year. Middle-income countries such as Thailand, Uruguay, Bolivia, and Peru, much more years of education and about $400 per person per year of imports. And obviously in the kind of traditional countries that are already good trading partners of the U.S., such as Ireland, Korea, Spain, and the UK, very high levels of education, very high levels of trade. And the other graphs look essentially the same. Blue bars are education. Exemplary countries from those three groups are listed on the horizontal axis. In this case, it's the degree to which immigration from those countries is already highly skilled, and then in terms of political stability in the countries and therefore the kind of geopolitical threat presented by political instability, you'll see again that the levels of education in blue and the response or the related improvement in political stability are in the red bars. And going to effect sizes, I thought it might be interesting to also do a little bit of research or share how strong are these effects. What you see is a range here from around 0.4 to around 1. And if you recall Harry's comments, but also the benchmarks that I listed there, in social science typically, in fact, if 0.5 is considered medium, I think this is a little bit demanding. I think 0.5 is already pretty large, as Harry said, but I'm going with the conventional wisdom here of saying 0.5 is being very large as 1.2, and we'll see that the relationship between education and these factors is quite robust, quite strong. The range is 0.5 to 1, let's say. But, the question might arise, this is kind of magic. How does this happen? Why is this? Why do we get this kind of relationship? Is it causal? And, in my view, kind of the logic of it, you saw some of it in Harry's presentation, is that education makes you richer because it makes you more productive. you're more able to do more sophisticated tasks on the factory floor or at the office or at the shop. And richer people tend to be better trade partners. They buy more stuff from other countries. Their tastes become more varied. It's not just that they have higher income, but their tastes become varied. And also countries with more education tend to send more educated people to other skilled countries, disproportionately so. You get very few uneducated Germans migrating to the U.S., for instance. It's typically, so highly educated countries disproportionately send highly skilled migrants, which is what, in some ways, is the kind of migrants that you need to drive high-tech growth. And then educated people honestly tend to be more conservative because they have more to conserve. And they also tend to be better at demanding political accountability from their leaders. So typically, educated countries will have more accountable governments in general. Of course, these are generalizations. There are exceptions. And so the returns to education makes you richer. I won't stop on this because it's the same slide that Harry had, basically showing about 10% per year extra income per year of education, more for women and so on. And just in case there are, skeptics in the room that say, well, these are just correlations, is it causal? How do we know that this really happens? I think the way I would put it is that not all of it is causal, but I would say that much of it is largely causal. That's sort of the conservative, cautious side of the talking. Some of it is correlational. Obviously, you can't do a randomized controlled trial for something as complex as societal impact of education. But you can do some. I mean, there have been some experiments that give some people 1 year of education than others in a randomized way. And also, you can take advantage of natural randomization. For example, twin studies. If two identical twins, one got more education than the other, then it's likely the education, and that person has higher income, it's likely that it was the education that led to higher income because the genetic endowment of the two is the same. So there have been quite rigorous attempts to look at this. And then lastly, education is all of a whole with political stability and with trade, and these things are always contributing to each other and causing each other in a mutual causation way that is really kind of hard to disentangle with, say, a randomized controlled trial. But the more we look at these things, the more from various different points of view, the more convinced we are that they're there and that they're important, but they're hard to research for pure causality because while you can tell a story, for example, that education leads to more skilled labor and more productive labor and therefore more income, it's also true that it goes backward. More educated people are able to demand and afford more education, so you get a feedback loop. And anytime you have a feedback loop, it gets difficult to do sort of causal research because, well, for obvious reasons. But it also leads to a population that is more skilled at demanding accountability, and so it feeds back into education from the quality side as well. And more educated people are able to demand more accountability from their governments, which typically creates a better investment climate, leads to more physical investment, and we know from a lot of research that the two main things that make a country productive are physical plant and skilled labor. And so these two things work with each other, work synergistically, and therefore tend to be hard to measure in a simple-minded way, but are definitely real. And there are the demographic effects as well. And I'm highlighting here just a few of the effects that we know from research. More educated, more skilled people tend to be more skilled birth attendants. More skilled birth attendants tends to lower the infant mortality rate. You lower the infant mortality rate, and then people have less desired family size because they're not trying to have a lot of kids to compensate for the ones that die. And so you get smaller family sizes, which makes education more affordable and increases demand for education. And then increased incomes and increased education leads to a variety of Chase, and increased demand for trade and imports. So these things are real. They're a little hard to disentangle causally. I mean, in the sense that you can't look at this and then conduct a randomized control trial at the social level to disentangle this kind of stuff. But it's, I'm convinced that it's really not. And there's literature on it. So then I want to talk about why early. And why start with the basic proficiencies? And again, mostly using macro data. And I'll skip over a couple of these slides, or I'll go fairly quickly because Harry has already covered them. But note that in the previous slides that I used, we're talking about years of education. And as Harry noted, years of education, you have to look at quality, not just years, but also why early. And it's not just the total years, or the point is that in order to get the total years, you need to start somewhere. Education is extremely path dependent. That's the point, to echo Harry's point. What happens early either makes possible or precludes what happens later. You can't go to high school unless you know how to read. Well, ideally. I mean, in some countries it seems like you can, but in general. And that's because knowledge builds on knowledge. And for that reason, there are what we call Matthew effects. I'll bring one up quickly. And we also know from cost-effectiveness research that fixing a problem by grade 4 or 5 is a lot more expensive than preventing it to begin with by having proper instruction in grades 1 or 2. I think most of you are educationists, so maybe I won't spend too much time on this, except to say that, and it's hard to find this kind of data in developing countries because they're just not as obsessive about the research as we are, say, in the U.S. But these are the paths of children, in green paths of children that are sort of on the track to success, and in red, the path of children that are not. And you see that without intervention, there is this big divergence, and so, this path is set pretty early. This is year 1, month by month measurement, and the path is set fairly early. So it pays to subvert that path, or at least make the red ones try to come up to the green ones. Otherwise, I don't want to say their fate is sealed, but they're not likely to do as well, as again, Harry said. But a very interesting study from Senegal showing what are the factors that predict completion of primary school. And you can see there are really only 2 factors that are of major importance. One is household wealth, and we would expect that. But the most important one is how long they did in 2nd grade. So how long they did in 2nd grade is the strongest predictor of whether they'll complete primary or not. So just adding to the evidence. And these effects take place in other languages. Non-Western languages haven't been researched that much. But it's certainly not just a feature of English, the complexity of English orthography. And I think there's some kind of interesting evidence from demonstration projects or pilot projects, the kind of projects that Harry was talking about and that the Georgetown people studied, which is looking at comparing India and Vietnam and the impact of one particular NGO's intervention. And I just find it really interesting from a kind of Matthew effect point of view that this NGO, even though it has some of the most effective interventions around, wasn't able to have an impact in Vietnam because they're already doing so well. There's just not much more that you could do. And so Vietnam is a country where it probably is not that much of an actual fact. India, on the other hand, this NGO was able to have a big impact. But notice that in spite of their impact, the schools where they're working are still performing not as well as even the control or comparison schools in Vietnam. So, we don't have too much direct evidence of natural effects in developing countries, but we have this kind of indirect evidence that those natural effects are there and that they are correctable. And again, Harry showed some of that evidence. And then one really important point that I want to make before trying to go to my last 4 or 5 slides, I'm paying attention to the clock, Jean-Marc, I might go over by 1 or 2 minutes, is evidence on the fact that the countries that make the most progress on things like Tim's and pizza, do so by addressing the bottom of their pyramid, the bottom of their learning distribution. So what I'm going to do here is show you a kind of movie, bringing up countries in rank order of their scores. So I'm going to bring up first the countries that score the least on Tim's, all the way up to the countries that score the most on Tim's. And what you see is that the country that scores the least has something like 70% of their kids at the bottom level. And as you progress and as the average increases, what you see is this vast decrease in the percentage of kids at the bottom level, and a modest, at first, a modest increase in the kids at the highest level. So we don't know the history of Vietnam very in detail, but my guess is that over time, this is what Vietnam did. It sort of attacked the fact that there would be kids that are not learning at all. And you can see that kind of, you create this kind of cognitive middle class here by reducing these numbers here a lot, and eventually, when you thoroughly address that, then countries like Singapore and Korea are overturned. They're kind of now beginning to produce that bulge over on the other side. But the biggest thing that they do at first is reducing that level. So then the question arises if our kids in countries, potential partner countries of the U.S., not Canada's and the Estonia's and the UK's, those are already the real partners, but, poorer countries that could become better partners, how are they doing? And we know, don't want to spend too much time on this graph because Harry already covered it, that some of the faster growing segments of these economies are the ones where reading comprehension is most important. So we have the ratings of the importance of reading comprehension from one study matched with another study that shows which are the sectors of those economies that are going to grow the fastest, and you can see a correlation there. And yes, and so we know the importance of this, and I'm going to take 1 minute or two, Jean-Marc, because I don't know if you've ever seen me show this graphic, but I think it's quite dramatic, and if you guys want to kind of understand what this is all about in a deep way, there's no better way than to make you suffer for 1 minute. So, go. Mainly the poorer countries. This is real. And the kids in the left-hand graph are the kids that in Harry's terms aren't going to make it to the end of the primary or certainly not to high school. And even when the situation is not so bad, the variation within the countries is big. So people say, well, Mexico, Brazil, those are countries that are doing okay, but they're a third of the states in Mexico are, kind of not going well at all. So there's huge variation. Indonesia, on average, not too bad, but huge regional variations. So we need to pay attention to that. So what are some of the policy implications? And I'll just be 1 minute late, more. Investment in early literacy is key to educational development, because in order to get those years of education, you need to make it past the first home. Educational development aligns with key foreign policy aims in the U.S., political stability, trade, growth. But for many countries, their ability to partner, to be meaningful partners in the U.S. is highly limited because of the lack of education, and in particular because of the lack of foundational skills, because without those foundational skills, you can't make it to the higher levels. I think it's fair to say, and maybe the Georgetown people could confirm or deny what I'm about to say, is that the U.S. as a country with a bilateral development agency in USAID, probably of all the international agencies, has the most grand level experience on how this can be done. So out of a lot of those projects that Harry put up before showing those big impacts, I would guess 2/3 of them, at least, maybe 3/4, are USAID-funded projects. There's kind of an accumulating more of knowledge on how you do this, and I think it'd be really good to potentiate that. And yet, literacy has not been achieved. So it's important, we know how to do it, we haven't quite done it yet. It's sort of time to invest and do it right. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Coming a bit with us. So it's time to discuss. It's a lot of information, it's a lot of elements, technical. I'm not going to try to summarize it, just giving some comments on. I will start to ask a few questions for panelists, and then I will go to you to have questions. And I will try not to be a like-minded economist and try to challenge them a little bit, to have some fun and also good discussion. But you probably noticed that in the presentation they touch the same kind of points with different angles, which is quite interesting. As good economists, they talk about the impact of education on different dimensions, income, individual income, inflation, trade, stability. They could also have mentioned health. That's a well-known and well-informed one. So I think that's quite an important one. I will mention the 10% average per year for education. That's a high number. If some of you invest your money actions or this kind of thing, you will see that 10% return is really interesting. And when you talk to the Minister of Finance, talking about 10% return in an investment is something that the Minister of Finance should consider. But we still have a hard time to make that case, I must say. So we are already talking about high impact for education in general. The other point they are both making, and I was touching on it at the introduction, was while we have a problem of quality of education in a lot of countries, mainly low-income and low-middle-income countries. We could add to the numbers of UIA that most of the kids that are not learning in school, the bulk of them are in middle-income countries or low-middle-income countries. So we have a challenge here around the quality of education. We can see across the board. And then the third point that is coming out is how important early grade reading, early grade learning, but more specifically early grade reading, is in tackling this learning challenge on all the potential of education for the different elements we touch upon. So I think I will start with a quick question, kind of a journalistic one, but I want a short answer. You have been touching to a lot. Basically, you put together, if we put all your arguments together, that's a very strong case for investment in early grade reading, basically on the table here. But I would like to hear from you both, but with a different perspective, how you're working in a multilateral agency. What would be your top argument internally in the World Bank to convince your colleagues we should do more around early grade reading? And same question for you, Louise, but taking a more bilateral perspective, and here in the US, what would be your top arguments to convince investment in early grade reading from the US side of things? Harry, do you want to start?
Sure. The argument that we give, or I give to Ministers of Finance and to our colleagues in the bank, is that we not only are the returns high for the individual, these are private returns. If we were to consider what the country gets out of it, it's huge, potentially even larger than 10 or 20% we get in individual returns. So it's a low-cost investment, but with huge returns. And the returns not only for that program itself and for those individuals as they go through the education cycle, but it makes your other investments more productive. We make this case also to our non-human development colleagues as well, that the investments in the power plant and the road depend also on the skills of the workers.
I guess I would say the same thing Harry has said, is that economists have known for decades that the rate of return to education is very high. The one thing that I would add, perhaps, or two quick things that I would add. One is that It's one of the few investments where there's no contradiction between gains in returns and gains in efficiency and sort of social justice or equity, because in order to realize these investments, you almost by definition, as I saw in one of my slides, you have to focus on the ones that are learning the least, which are typically the poorest. So it's an area where, unlike perhaps infrastructural investment or other areas of investment where the investment might potentiate those who are already fairly well off, this is an area where the investment really works for the poor. So it's that rare thing, namely an investment that maximizes both efficiency and equity. Just one little point, though, is that in general, when I would advise my colleagues that it's good to invest but also how to invest, Jean-Marc. I mean, and I like to tell a story of one time that the Ministry of Education in a country sent me to talk to the Ministry of Finance, and they said, Luis, go tell the Ministry of Finance, don't they realize education is a good investment? And tell them that they need to expand. And I did that. I was only about 32, so I was probably naive at the time. And the Ministry of Finance says to me, the Minister of Finance says to me, but Luis, I wouldn't know that. I know education is a good investment. I just don't trust those guys in the Ministry of Education as investment managers. So when I tell USAID or the bank, yes, let's invest in education, but also let's invest at least some of that money in making sure that we know how to manage the sector through measurement, through better support to the teachers, through accountability. We haven't talked enough about accountability, but accountability systems. So, you know, if you get trained and you don't use the training because there's no accountability, then, you know, the training is kind of wasted. So, yeah, sorry, that was a longer response than you wanted, but...
That's fine, and it's a nice transition with my second question, which is around the how, because I think that's already an important one. I've been in the same kind of discussion, I'm sure I will too, with Minister of Finance. I was advocating for education, and the Minister of Finance look at all the money we are putting in the education sector right now, and look at the results that yourself showing us in terms of learning in particular. So it's always something that is coming by Minister of Finance, look at these kind of things. And we are putting a lot of money, but we don't get out much of that money. What you need is to convince this Minister of Finance that what we are doing now is going to provide results in a different way than what was happening by the past. And I think that's here the challenge. And coming back to a more specific question, we are talking for the low-income countries in particular, but also low-middle-income countries for some of them, at least the less performing one. We are talking about systems that are not working well, and some part of the system not working at all. So the question here, I know the WGR is really focusing on system issue, on their indicators, the service delivery indicators showing that there's not enough teaching time. So here it seems to me that and I would like your page on that question. We have a combination, as usual, a complexity of situation where system failures are not necessarily only early grade failures, that school is not happening, or very little is happening. And you have also the lack of focus on the early grade learning or early grade reading that is happening. How do we look at this when we talk about the how, the policy side of things, how we address that? The risk I can see that if we just say it's all about early grade reading, but teachers are not in schools, some of the programs that are highly effective work because there's no teacher teaching or kids are not in school, etc. So how do we ensure that we have this system approach to bring the results that we would expect?
Thanks, Jean-Marc. That is the big question. Just a couple of days ago, we had the Minister of Finance from Indonesia come, and in her public address mentioned the point that Indonesia invests 20% by constitution of its budget on education, and she asked why she seeing the results that were expected. And I think part of the problem in education is that we equate spending with investment, and there's most of the resources that go to education are domestic resources, public resources from the country itself. So moving the needle on that requires getting into that system directly. So in addition to the accountability argument that Luis mentioned, also what's required to really make a difference is to have these clear indicators of what we're talking about. And I think we bundle the benefits of education a bit too much and make it difficult to equate. So some people hear invest in education, they think of spending more, or they hear paying for inputs. And the typical minister of education in a low-income country has way too many responsibilities compared to the higher-income countries where the Minister of Education is in charge of providing vision and making sure that things happen. In the typical developing country, they're doing service provision, the financing, the assessment, everything, right? So we have too many responsibilities to the Minister of Education and not enough support because they don't have the resources or capacity to deliver on these. But simplifying these things is a big step forward. And many of us are happy and a bit, anxious on these indicators for the SDGs, which will be translated into national goals. So if we don't know what the problem is, very difficult to get any movement on it. We need to know exactly how many children are in school not reading, where they are, so we can actually design the programs. I think these proposals that seem to be emerging towards an early reading indicator will be very useful. If they're too late in the cycle, it'll be very difficult to use them to actually make movement. We're already into the SDGs and we don't yet have that early measurement. It's critical. And then making sure that the programs that we have, what can we do at the margin? Our projects are, whatever we invest in a particular project is a fraction of what the country is spending. So if we don't have those measurements in place and supporting these national programs, we won't see the results. So the early measurement and the targeting of the resources to those outcomes, I think, is critical.
Yeah, I would just only add to that focusing on what Joe DeStefano, a colleague at RTI, and Ben Piper, another colleague, and myself have been calling the bare bones functional systems that you need in order to achieve some of these things. And we noted that, Dr. O'Harry, that there are sort of three components or three systemic issues or components that we see as bare bones. The first one is, can the country agree on a numerical target and a measurement? So, we want to agree on some way to measure and some benchmarks around how do we get there. And then have the systems of support that came out in that slide from the Georgetown study with 5 or 6 components. Being able to monitor those is key because those are the components that move the needle on the agreed upon results. So having the ability to monitor, but then the ability to also demand accountability and provide support through those bare bones aspects. I would say those would be the key issues that I would highlight.
Thank you. I think it's time to go to the audience now. And, I will ask people a question and keep your question short, that we can have several questions. I will take a first round of 3 or 4 questions. Let's see.
Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, I want to say thank you. There's a lot of very compelling evidence, especially on the early grade reading aspect. I do have a question about the issue of the causality, correlation kind of thing around income. I can see your eyes going, oh, not that. But my question is actually maybe not the question that you're thinking I'm going to ask. Historically, we used to think about proving education was valuable by looking at things like girls' ed, increased health, and all of these other types of things. And I'm just wondering if it's a sign of the times a bit that we're trying to prove that education increases income, And when, you know, most people would say, yeah, I'm sure there's some level of causality, but there's also a million other adjectives you can put in there, you know, that would also be correlated to education levels and income. So I'm wondering if you guys could answer, or you could answer, why are we framing it around that particular argument? Because it does seem that it's still a little bit weak in terms of, is it correlation or is it causality? And why do we want to dive into that sort of gutter, you know?
Another question on the back.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful chance to see these many presentations and to discuss this data. I have two questions, and everyone knows I am not an economist nor a statistician, so apologies if they are naive. For your movie, which I thought was among, you know, the many excellent things we saw this morning, and to create the movie that I watched, one question I think we're still trying to answer, and other panelists please chip in, is, right, I understand, I need to invest, and I need to invest in that left-hand side of things in the early years so that I get my curves to do what I am seeing them do. How much do I need to invest? If I'm that Minister of Finance, what is the actual number, the per child number, or the per class number, or the per X number that it costs? And perhaps we have that answer, but I don't have it, so I'd love it if I could get it from you. And then the other question, which is simpler, is I was struck by a data point that we, I think, don't often use enough, and I can't really think now why. Which was it costs 4 times as much to fix something as to get it right first. I just don't see us leveraging the power of that. That's an incredibly powerful statement. What is it based on? Where is it grounded? And why aren't we using it more?
So maybe we can start with this question. Please, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to the first point, no, this stuff is not new, and these kinds of concerns. I mean, you know, sort of the father of economics, Adam Smith. Most economists don't actually read Adam Smith. I actually took the time in my first, in the summer break in my first year at grad school to actually read The Wealth of Nations, and it's there. It's 250 years old, but these arguments are all there. And the arguments for, not only for the benefits of education, but also the earliest and strongest arguments for why education, or at least certain components of education, or at least the financing of education, in case Harry takes me to task, is a public good. Maybe not necessarily the delivery. You can deliver it through private mechanisms quite often, but the funding of it has a strong component. So those are arguments that are 250 years old, and you know, in more modern times, you know, Paul Schultz was making these arguments 50 years ago using modern statistics. I mean, sorry, Ted, yes. I think Paul actually too, but anyway. The current generation of these arguments is, you know, maybe 50 or so years ago. They were writing in the 60s, 70s. You know, the impacts on mortality and demographic factors, I neglected them to some degree because, I mean, there's not enough time, and I wanted to sort of refresh the arguments. Those are very well known. The impacts on infant mortality and so on are extremely well known. I thought it'd be interesting to highlight some of the other impacts. As to how much money, you know, that's a hairy debate, and I would say it's more a matter of how well you invest it than how much you invest. But I would also argue that, you know, below a certain minimum, I mean, if a country literally cannot afford, or thinks it cannot afford, or is not spending enough to afford, to give its children something to read, like Liberia either was doing or is still doing, I don't know, then, you know, there's a bare minimum below which you can't go. And, you know, I don't want to sort of risk putting a number on it, but at the time Liberia was spending, I think, 1.6% of GDP on education. And I would say that's too low. On the other hand, we also know that Namibia spends 10% of its GDP, or was until recently, 8, 9, 10% of its GDP on education, and not getting very many results. So it's certainly not an argument about how much, it's an argument about how well. The issue of taking a lot more, I don't know if 4 is exactly the right number, I have that number in my head. I could get that literature for you. I think I learned that number from someone in the audience here, so you may want to talk to her.
Great.
Maybe I'm imagining things, Marcia, but I think I learned this from you. Maybe not.
Oh. You mean Dr. I know her.
But we'd be glad to dig up that information for you.
That would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, or maybe Marcia can.
And I don't want Andy's question to come to Marcia. Thank you, Louise.
Thanks. I pretty much agree with what Louise said. Just on the cost saving suggestion, that's excellent. And we do make that argument. I think that one works well, especially with the ministers of finance, to tell them about the long-term benefits of something. You know, they're interested, but what are they going to see within the next few years? And I think we can show with good education programs that we're able to make the system more efficient. There are cost savings that they can use then to get more people into the program. So we can make that case. So getting early reading, that's a great case of cost savings, because then you have more people going into the system. It brings down the cost of your education system. It brings down the unit cost at least, but also all those sort of remedial things that we do. If we had a more long-term calculus on the actual benefits of early reading, we can do even more the way we did for early child development. I think that is the next phase in the research. So in addition to making the income case, which is a private case, right? I mean, we need some kind of metric. The reason why I think it's important to do that, in addition to what we said, is that we do need that counterfactual to show that this is what people are actually missing out on. So the returns are high in many low-income, underperforming systems because people are not able to benefit from that. You get very low returns in high-income countries because people are able to look at the system and it brings down those costs. So many people are earning high returns for the education system because other people are denied opportunities for the education system. I also don't know of a number that you need, but I think I would couch it more in terms of the outcomes that you want to achieve. You could spend a lot, and we can see systems that spend a lot per student but don't get the result. I'd rather see targets that are, children reading at grade level and fund it that way. I think that would be the mechanism that I would use to address that.
Thank you. Let me take the opportunity to add two stories on how, I try to avoid also my own question. Of course, I fully agree with what was said, and I think I really very important points. One challenge we have in education, for the Ministry of Finances, or investments, take years to see results. And that's a very difficult one. Even when you say it's 10, 12, 15% return rate, which is really high, it will take 10, 15, 20 years to see these returns fully there. And that's not easy to convince a minister or politician in general to wait that time to see the return on investment. And the strong case in early grade reading is that you don't need to wait that long to see the results, or at least to have an idea of the results that will bring the progress. So I think that's a very important point. I would not be in agreement with what was said also on income. The link between income and education is something that I've been through when I was a graduate student. It's really an old story with economics and education. So that's not new at all. So other set of questions.
Yes, I'm sorry. Andy, is your question answered? No, it's fine. Don't worry. I don't know if there was an answer, so it doesn't really matter.
Because I didn't see one. That's the one.
Well, no, it's fine. Let's not get too distracted by it. Do you want to ask it another way? No. Good. Unless somebody else wants to reframe it in a way. No, everyone's looking at me. So,
well, I mean, it's the point that there's a particular political reason why we may be asking that question now. And is it providing any additional insights that we didn't already have? And that is caught us in a bigger, more complicated picture that is maybe as articulable to people who are looking for answers on why we should invest in education.
That could be. I mean, it could be that it's political. It could be that it's just simply not as compelling as some of the other things that we're talking about. And so I'm wondering why we're framing it that way, if there is an important element to it, or if we're on to something that we need to fill in some blanks. But I don't want it to distract from this larger conversation.
Well, just from, from our perspective, I think it's critical for us in the World Bank to make that argument, because we are trying to convince ministers of finance to shift spending towards education and in this case early years. And I think the income argument does make sense. And along with the fact that basic education is also a human service, it's 20% of the budget, it's human right, et cetera. It does help to make that case that you're not only denying a right of getting it, you're also denying people a basic earnings, right? So even if the causality argument couldn't be made, the fact is people are being paid based on their level of education. So if somebody's hiring people, the thing to see on the advert is level of education. So even if it was purely screening and there's evidence that it isn't, even if it was, it's still important. I would still tell someone, even if it wasn't causal, get more education, because you won't even get in through the door. So it's already part of the calculus. You can say it's a private benefit, but since we're talking about early education, it's still part of a public service, and it's part of a human right. So it still helps in that regard. So I do see the point. I don't think it's the only thing, but unfortunately it's all that we have so far. If we had the calculus that Heckman used for early child development, then we could make a more complete story on the returns and actually have the social returns. I think that the elements are there, just that no one has yet followed up that cohort. Maybe Louise will follow up one of these cohorts that went through these early reading programs, and then we can see all the benefits of having that early reading assessment, just like we did under the SAT.
Let's move to the other questions, and we can have a follow-up discussion on causality and other topics, but that's a difficult one.
I wanted to just follow up on Rebecca's question, but just frame a little differently. What did you talk a little bit more about Vietnam and lessons learned from a country that is of lower income? And I don't know the history of literacy rates in Vietnam and whether Vietnam is an example of a country that went from a much lower literacy rate to a much higher literacy rate in a relatively short period of time. And if so, what are those lessons? I once heard from the Ministry of Education in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia speak about the example from Saudi Arabia, which had gone from a 90% illiteracy rate to a 90% literacy rate. Now, they clearly had a lot of money after oil was discovered and it enabled it. But I wonder if there are lessons learned in terms of how they actually were strategic and how they spent that money to really make it a much more effective or efficient system, and what kind of takeaways from those kinds of other models out there.
There was another question.
I have a question about threshold that defines reading sufficiently enough so that all the additions there's no longer a need for this huge influx of additional resources. I know with the projects we do now, we generally complete them after the end of grade 3, 2 or 3, and the results that we've seen across the board, while we have some really good results, a lot of times children are still reading at a rate that's still well below what one would say is proficient. So what do you think, what would you anticipate the investment need is to get some kind of threshold so that children would be able to take off and become really proficient readers?
One in the front.
You touched on the systems approach and how important that was to achieve results. And I was wondering if you have seen any trend. Each country is different, and some are more centralized systems, others more decentralized. If there's been any research or trends on which approach works better in developing countries.
The last one here.
Or which system?
the World Bank especially is focusing these days a lot on results-based financing for these projects, which makes sense, and it's kind of like a term that's being used a lot, but can you contrast it a bit more, not just kind of like, okay, there are certain results that need to be there, like reading at grade level and so on, but within the project, what other results are you looking forward to regarding the financing basically that is the project?
Thank you. I don't start with
Okay, I'm not necessarily competent to answer all those points, so I'll just take on the ones that I think I could have something to contribute on. I think, I don't know, but I think what distinguishes countries like Vietnam and others is, I would say the crucial characteristic is, it's going to sound like a sort of bland management bromide, but it's management by objectives. It's making out of learning a real objective. So, you know, systems were pretty good at getting kids into school, bums on seats, because that was a fairly clear objective. Society came to buy into it. It's easy to measure. Learning is a lot harder. You have to measure it, and you have to declare it an objective, and you have to set targets. And I think countries like Vietnam, China, are pretty good at management by objectives. And I'm fairly agnostic as to how you do that. I don't know that you need to be highly centralistic. I think you can, as long as the objectives are clear and there is support for meeting those objectives, I think you can do it in a decentralized way. Some of the best education systems in the world are highly decentralized. Some of the worst education systems in the world are highly decentralized. So, you know, some of the best education systems in the world are quite private. Some of the worst education systems in the world are highly private. So, as long as the objectives are clear, they're measured, they're bought into by the society, and there is some support for meeting them in terms of, again, those 5 or 6 factors that were highlighted, I think it can go. And I think that's probably the secret of places like Vietnam. I'm certainly not an expert on the Vietnamese education system. On the issue of thresholds, Marcia, again, you know, I'm just going to go back to the point that I just said, namely that I don't know that it's a matter of necessarily more investment. You phrase it as how much more investment do we need? I think it may be a matter of time. So I think you need to give it time. I think in some of the countries that are successfully scaling up and where you're beginning to see some impact, they've had time, they've had the ability to iterate. So even though you can produce experimental results in 2 years, getting countries to buy in and the system to begin to imbibe that is part of it. But I think to some extent it's time, to some extent it's coming to own the issue and to own the objectives and to get militant about it. And to me that matters probably more than money. I don't know, how much money, do you happen to remember how much money Vietnam spends? What percentage of GDP in Vietnam spends on education? Do you have any clue? I suspect it's not that high. So they do it because they're kind of militant, you know, and set objectives and measure and learn from those objectives. So they iterate. Let's see. I guess those are the 2 that I feel sort of competent to answer. But yeah, I'll come at the end toward one of the sort of floating things in the room. I think there will be time.
Thanks. Just on Vietnam, I think the lesson that we take away for their educational success is early in the post-war period, they focused on basic education. So every commune, as they call it, a school district, had a primary school. That was their public priority, and less emphasis on the higher levels to begin with, but make sure there's a public primary school in every district, make sure there are teachers there. There's no absenteeism. We looked at this. There's no problem of attendance of students at the primary school level. They organized primary school system, and then they built on that, which is exactly the Korean post-war example as well of the education system. building from the base and then moving forward. At the same time, they put in policies that would allow the investment at secondary and higher education. In fact, Korea borrowed from the World Bank up until 1980. The last project they did was a higher education project. They were still on their primary and secondary school priority. They for public money. They borrowed from the World Bank, lent to private colleges to ensure investment in higher education. That's something that very few countries have continued to do. What we see in many, including the other Asian countries, is sort of equal attention to all levels of schooling with public expenditures and never reaching the levels of achievement that we see in the early years in Vietnam. Cambodia might be an example of a country that's about to build this threshold. I don't know. We'll see. On the threshold question, the only literature I know is going back to even Anderson and Bowman and Easterlin, and more recently someone named Drazen, who looked at thresholds related to education and then economic growth, and they said mass literacy, and I forget what the number was that determined mass, maybe 80%, I could be wrong, had a threshold effect. So until you've got basic literacy for a large number of the population, you didn't see that growth level. So that's the only threshold that I know of in education, that early literacy indicator, which coincides with what we're talking about today. So it's good news in that regard. On the systems approach, I think that the country that really seems to exemplify at least the systems approach that we talked about in our Saber, people know that, Singapore stands out very much in terms of getting the basics right. And I think that you do the early reading program, the pilots, but if they're not scaled, they won't work. But then what do you do after the children are literate? You need to invest in the quality of education. I think a country like Singapore is very good at selecting teachers. Very, very difficult to become a teacher in Singapore, and then giving them support as they improve, and constant curriculum feedback to keep improving the system. Similar kinds of approaches in Korea and Finland, I think. Specific question on the results-based financing, what it means for us. As you might know, we have committed to increasing the share of our education programs that are results-based, and that could be in the instruments that we have that are actual that disperse against the achievement of certain outputs or outcomes, but also in the regular investments to have components that are linking our disbursement to results. Typical World Bank project reimburses on what's spent in the project. The difference with the results-based is that we're not funding inputs, we're funding the outputs, and then of course the governments are using that to fund their national programs. But it takes the focus away from the inputs to what we actually want to achieve in the program. When I was managing projects, we spent a lot of time looking at the windows and the walls and whether we procured the right specs. We had very little time to talk about outcomes. When we focus on these projects, on the outputs, it becomes a lot more useful discussion and focus. Earlier, I would say, we started shifting towards outcomes as indicators, but we didn't have a very good knowledge base about what it took to achieve those results, especially within a project base. So we have projects that said, learning will increase by X%, but we had no basis on which to judge that, and then often projects look like failures because we didn't have those in the project time frame. Now with the evidence-based impact evaluations, we know how much learning can take place in a year. We know which programs are more cost-effective. We can actually put those in the programs. And we're starting to see again now more emphasis on actual learning outcomes with control groups, with baseline and line surveys. And that's I think, a very positive feature. Difficult to do, but it's a very positive feature of our project. They also allow us to work in national systems and avoid the project units that was characteristic of the old-style project.
Can I ask quickly as to whether, an interest in in the relationship between education and issues such as political stability, is that something particularly new or particularly in fashion in very recent times? I would say really no. I mean, economists of education have been looking at the relationship of education to things like political participation, political accountability, political stability for years. Probably, one of the canonical references and perhaps the most careful compilation of what are all, really kind of an encyclopedic analysis of all the impacts of education across social sectors as diverse as, whether people litter, whether people, comply with their drug regimes when they're under medication, and just massive sort of compilation was a book by a professor of education economics at the University of Illinois called Walt McMahon. This book, I think, already dates back to about 2000, maybe 2005 or something like that, where, like I said, there's this kind of encyclopedic listing of all the cross-sectoral impacts. You could say that a lot of what we've talked about here is new evidence because it's recent data, there's a lot more data around now, but in some ways it's not evidence about something that is new. So it's new evidence, but not necessarily evidence about something that is new because, like I said, Adam Smith was writing about this 250 years ago, Walt McMahon was writing about it. I think his big book is already maybe 15 years old. So this kind of stuff has been around.
Thank you. I had 2 points to your comments. One is this question about the level of investment is coming. Because again and again, I think it's very difficult to answer that question in a general way. But one thing I will add to what Luis and Harry already said is that when we talk about low-income countries and low-middle-income countries, efficiency gains can be massive. So it's not only having more money going in education, it's also the way the money is used. I think that's really important to bear that in mind, particularly when we are using a well-functioning system. You think always additional funding to get to a different place. When you are in a dysfunctional system where massive efficiency gain can be done, it's not necessarily massive increase of funding that will make a difference. So I think that's really important to bear that in mind when we look at domestic financing in particular. That's not the same thing when we did in the World Bank of GP to invest, of course. And to come back on the results-based financing, because GP is also implementing a results-based financing with a specific component on learning outcomes. So of course we are quite cautious in terms we're working in a lot of fragile and conflict-affected countries, so we're not getting on hard things in context that are not relevant for that, but it's always, as I mentioned, a local discussion, and that's quite interesting because when you talk about learning outcomes and try to push to measurements, you see by default, as we are talking about a 3 to 4 years project, people look at early grades, and there's a kind of unexpected or unintended consequence of the results-based financing in GP is more focused on early grade reading, in particular in terms of how we measure results around learning. I think that's I wanted to flag that because I saw that happening in the dialogue at country level about how we measure learning outcomes for a span of time of 3 or 4 years. We could better look at grade 2 or grade 3. So that's something we see happening, and it's quite interesting. I think we're getting out of time. Should I take other question, or should I ask our panelists to conclude? Is there any burning question?
Yeah, can we do one more round? Sure. Oh.
I have to take on this question.
Good question.
2 burning questions. There was one here. To be fair, one at the back.
My question is for Luis. I'm convinced about early grade reading, but you mentioned something right at the end of your presentation about a bare bones focus. what I'm hoping is that you're going to be focusing on what elements of the system reforms should take place, because clearly we know that everything in systems are articulated, but where's the low-hanging fruit, and where do you think one should focus for the largest impact?
The other side? The back.
Hi, I'm Allison from the Reach Project. I feel bad now about getting the last question in our own event, but I guess it follows Karen's question in that I think a lot of people are convinced, about the importance of early grade reading and the impact that it can have, and it seems like, oh, we've narrowed it down to this silver bullet of early grade reading, setting aside some other key factors, but as probably everybody in the room knows, improvements in early grade reading only happen when you tackle this incredible panoply of issues, from teacher mobility to the publishing sector to language orthography, and it goes on and on. So how do I communicate the message that, it's simple but it's complicated, and it can happen quickly, but it requires the investment of 15 years to see the impact in a way that, I guess, isn't both confusing and makes, people, ministers, run out of the room because messages are all sort of colliding with each other. But we know after several years of doing this, it in some ways becomes more and more complicated as we continue to be successful.
Okay, if people are short, I can take two more questions, I guess.
Yeah.
So one here, on my side.
Thank you. We have the EGMA and the AGRA and the PISA and TIMS, and we're measuring lots of things in education really well, but we've also recently been talking about, skills versus higher order thinking and social emotional learning, and even some of the topics, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but the lady who just asked was talking about sort of how our money is used, and how which aspects of education systems are not performing well. And I'm wondering, Dr. Luis mentioned that the objectives need to be clear and they need to be measured. Are we able to measure the things that we need to measure? And where are we doing that well, and where do we need to learn?
Thank you. Last question here.
Thank you, and I promise it is linked actually to both Karen and Allison's question. Back to the variability in systems issues and the complexity. He said, then, I don't know who else we're talking, and we're saying, okay, it comes down to benchmarks and measurement, how to monitor, and then accountability. So I wanted to get to that accountability point. And I know you're all economists, but since you brought it up, and this may be a conversation for the whole community, you're saying that the literature shows that, in fact, those who can demand greater accountability are those with the least amount of education. So you were saying education, I'm actually interested in that literature, I need to go back and look at it more closely, is linked to the greater ability to demand accountability, which is part of this vicious or virtuous circle. So if you need that accountability to then get to these kinds of changes that we're talking about, I think we need to dig into that quite a bit and figure out what that is even composed of, what that accountability looks like. And I don't think it's just an education issue, particularly because a lot of these countries that need this stuff the most, you're looking at deeply clientelistic systems where people, in fact, are accountable to each other in different ways, where they're getting quite important personal benefits, where it's not adding up to the common good. And just saying we need more accountability is not going to cut it. So I think that behooves us to dig into that a little bit, particularly because if supposedly education is a part of getting that to happen, then we're in this.
Thank you. That's a very nice set of questions. Do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks. So the question on how complex and difficult this is, I mean, that's taken. But I think in education, I think we have the issue that we need to convince governments, for example, to invest in education. They're already committed to this. There's a lot of study that goes on. The challenge is to influence that to some extent to get the outcomes that are important. So I think on basic education, countries spend a large amount of their budgets, and they will continue to do so. The challenge here is to make that education effective, especially for the poor, is to focus on the very early years in those countries where it's a significant issue. But in order to do that, we need to know where the problems are and to direct that investment and make the case for that part of it. And I think there, the part that we need to influence on the part of the financiers is to make the case for the efficiency of their investment and their spending that's taking place. So that's the challenge that we have, and we seem to have been successful. We've seen the World Bank on early child development, that we've seen a huge spike in investments on early childhood because of the cases made. The economic case, the social case, the science of child development has been useful. The other area is on nutrition, specifically on the study, showing those graphics have had a huge impact on ministers when our president makes that case, and that's allowed us an entry point into the early years, and we're trying to pick up on that with the early reading. I want to go to the last point on the accountability argument. I agree that you get a lot more demands when the population is better informed, better educated. I think the question of getting the parents involved is critical. And in many countries where we know from PISA or TIMSS the results overall are very poor, I've seen surveys of parents in those countries, and they're very happy with their school. And there are some countries where you ask about education, and the parents say it's terrible. Ask them about their school, and they think it's great. In most of those cases, they either don't have the information or don't know how to access the information, how their school is doing compared to the rest. When they have that information, they become much better informed, and then suddenly even less educated parents become very vocal in demanding these services. Because after all, we're talking about public services that are guaranteed to them by perhaps the Constitution, definitely human rights, and when parents know this, they do make those demands. You don't need to do interventions for the middle class. It's for those that are disadvantaged. I think we've seen many examples where providing information does lead to a change. Probably all of you, like we do at home, get these energy consumption indicators in our bills. How much you consume, and then how much your neighbors consume. That comes from a study where just providing information to people and telling them they consume more than their neighbors leads to a significant decrease in energy consumption. Same thing in restaurants, those indicators on the A and the B on the hygiene is a consumer program, but it leads to the restaurants themselves changing their practices. And we see in education in programs where just providing the information to the school leaders leads to changes in the school that improve outcomes. Same thing with parents, giving them information on how schools are actually their schools are performing leads to demands on the system that have led to improvements in outcomes. So we do need to push the accountability a bit more when it comes to the populations that we care about. On the skills question, I think skills, social emotional skills, all these demands are coming through education systems, and we're demanding more and more of systems that are struggling to even provide the basic literacy. The good news is that many of these techniques for improving children's resiliency and great perseverance are also related to those cognitive skills. So sometimes it's a question of how to teach the regular kind of subjects that actually promotes learning and builds up the perseverance. I think the current piece of results have some indicators self-reported on perseverance and the like, and you can see the correlation. I think in future piece of assessment there will be more on this, so we'll learn more about how this works. And the last point on the skills, we hear a lot of demands from our client countries on the need for skills. And that used to be an argument, say, for vocational training and vocational education. Right now we're hearing employers talk about socio-emotional skills, talk about basic cognitive skills. So they're noticing the lack of these basic skills they should have gotten in primary school, and it's showing up in the labor market.
Yeah, just quickly then. There's a paper by Jonas and myself. You can Google it. I didn't include it in the references. I guess it didn't occur to me. By Jonas and myself under the RISE program, R-I-S-E program, spelled British way because it's a British program. You can look it up, and it's got some discussion there about what we call the bare bones that are a good place for any system to start with. And I think, and we touched upon accountability there, and yes, it's a complicated issue. You can just say accountability and think that's going to fix things automatically, but no, it's more subtle, and there are at least 3 or 4 layers or types of accountability that societies use: communitarian and professional and bureaucratic and market. One area that's often forgotten is that the accountability is typically mutual. Social contracts are two-way things, and frequently we want the teachers to be accountable, but we don't insist that the system be accountable to the teachers. So quite often, for example, teachers are asked for a certain level of performance, but then if you ask the teachers, well, does the system provide you with the tools that you need in order to discharge your performance targets? And the answer is usually no. When you ask most teachers, have you actually been given practical training on how to teach reading? And most teachers will say no. So, there's an accountability of the state to the teachers. There should also be accountability from the teachers to the state and the communities. Just to show you that, yes, it's complex. We can't just throw around the word accountability as if it were kind of a magic bullet. You need to dig into it. And then on the issue of simplicity and complexity, I think it's a matter of timing, it's a matter of process, because my observation of most systems and skills is that when you're observing something from the outside, or when you're new to it, it can seem dauntingly complex. Think of the skills that you need to master simultaneously to ride a bicycle. If you have to actually consciously control all the muscles and all the things that you need to do in order to maintain your balance on a bicycle and pedal, you probably couldn't do it. It's just too complex, all the little muscular motions and so on. But once you pick it up intuitively, then it becomes intuitive and it starts seeming simple, to the point where, we say once you learn how to ride a bicycle, you can never forget it. So I think this issue of simplicity and complexity, I think you need to kind of introduce it in a fairly simple way, get into the first layer of complexity so that people are not overwhelmed. But as you begin to get some results, and as you begin to dig into it, you begin to say, well, maybe we made an improvement in how the textbook was laid out and designed, or we made an improvement in making sure that the lesson plans were a little bit better specified, but maybe they got too specified, and we need to back off of that. So I think you need to get into the complexity gradually, and sort of not introduce things in a manner that is initially simple, but it has room and scope for the complexity to be built in once people can absorb it. That would be sort of my take on it.
Thank you. I would just add, for those who are interested on the accountability issue, that the next Global Education Monitoring Report is dedicated to this accountability theme. We will be launched, I guess, in the next 2 weeks. So keep an eye on that one, because it's an important topic for the community. So I think we are over time. organizers don't look very worried about that, but I think it's time for us to close. So I would like to thank Ari and Blue for a very rich discussion, and also you for a lot of thoughtful and sometimes provocative questions. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. And this was very interesting. And it was interesting because at the beginning of the program, someone said to me, well, I don't see anybody new. I haven't seen any before, so are we just preaching to the choir? But at the same time, it sounds like it generated a lot of questions and a lot of thinking among the community about other ways we should talk about the work we're doing. I mean, I think one of the strongest messages I got, at least the slide that really was compelling to me, was the slide that you showed on skills in the growth sector that required reading comprehension. I think that's not a usual perspective that we work from in talking about our work, and I think it's an important perspective. I think both Harry and Louise shared it, but it is an important perspective in terms of being able to sort of widen the type of partners who are interested in our work. And so I really appreciate the fact that you brought that up, because I came from an environment where we did a lot of TVET work, and I had a lot of people say to me, you know, no one comes to talk to me about the literacy skills that are needed in the TVET system, that the kids that are coming into the system, private sector as well. There wasn't an engagement from them. So I hope that it kind of stimulated your thinking about, as you do your work and you promote it to the governments that you're working with, just some other ways of talking about the work you're doing. We have some refreshments upstairs. We have cookies. I hope that doesn't ruin your lunch. We have fruit, but I want to. Yes, we have fruit. I ordered fruit. I made sure we had fruit. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about just some upcoming things we're doing with the GRN. Let's see. I'll start with some of the work in terms of the research and training area we're doing, but we are working with some folks in the community and putting together some training professional development resources for early grade reading. And the primary target is for USA musicians, but we really do want all the community to benefit from them. So Allison on our team is working on that. And she also wanted to share with you that we're going to be doing a half-day training on Creative Commons in December. And I know that was something that was of interest to the community to revisit that issue. We'll have a webinar on October 25th on assessing oral language, reading comprehension, and spelling skills, complements to the early grade reading assessment, so we hope that you will look for that. And just another good news, let me go to the research side. In terms of the research side, we're developing a series of white papers on structured pedagogy, formative assessments, coaching, early childhood education. And we've also been asked by USAID to work on a toolkit on early reading and disabilities in education. Just in other news as well, as some of you may know, USAID is going to absorb the community of practice within USAID after the end of our project next year. So with that in mind, we're going to regroup a steering committee just to be focused on this aspect, to go to the community of practice, understand a little bit more about your information needs at this point, understand how much the community of practice has served you up to this point, but also to think about where we might look for other partners who can support you in your work, just based on your needs. So next week we're actually going to be, you might have seen some time ago that we asked for interest in the steering committee. We finally have gotten to that point where we could do a vote on steering committee members. We developed a short list after reviewing many applications, and so you should see that in the near future. We'd love to hear from you as to who you think should help us advise USAID, advise our team as well, in terms of supporting USAID in standing up the community of practice internally at the organization. So I think I'll leave it there, and thank you again for coming. And if you see a need to have further discussions along these lines, it seems to be sort of a new discussion for the community of practice, let us know. We'd be happy to plan more activities like this.